Welcome to Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Meg Heaton, and I've lived in Hudson for close to 30 years now, most of that time working as a reporter for the Hudson Star-Observer. I recently retired and have become involved in an initiative to make our community more dementia-friendly. This program is one of several we are presenting to talk about what it's like living with dementia and what resources are available to families and friends living with the disease. Just like cancer, dementia is likely to hit every family in our area. And like the early days in cancer treatment, there's often a stigma attached to it, associated with fear and confusion and what to do next. But that is changing, in part because of people like my guest tonight. Dr. Kristen Severson is an internal medicine doctor with a specialty in geriatric medicine and a medical director for the Christian Community Home here in Hudson and for Adare Hospice. Welcome, Dr. Severson.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Let's just start with the basics. What exactly is dementia?
Everybody fears that as soon as you start forgetting where your keys are, where you parked your car, I've got dementia. But the reality is it's a loss of memory that starts to affect your function. And so I can't balance my checkbook anymore. Or some of the earlier signs that families and people can really be alert to are personality changes. Like it used to be I was the life of the party and in the middle of the group, and all of a sudden I'm starting to withdraw and step back. Or to stereotype the sweet grandma who you would never say anything wrong, all of a sudden she's letting the four-letter words go out, and that just isn't her.
Okay.
And so those can be some early signs of trouble. Or a classic example is I've always been the pie maker in my family, and all of a sudden Thanksgiving pie tastes horrible. Something isn't right because we aren't able to do what we've always done, and that's affecting function.
Okay.
And so the magic is the memory loss and the functional decline.
Is all dementia the same disease, or are there different?
Lots of difference.
Lots of difference.
One of my favorite questions or comments from families is that grandma was diagnosed with dementia, but she doesn't have Alzheimer's disease. And the reality is that I then go and explain that dementia is an umbrella, and under that umbrella are many different kinds of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is probably the one you hear about the most, but then there's also the other extreme of very unusual behavior-related memory loss, and that hits younger people. It could be related to medications, it could be related to strokes, blood pressure, medical conditions, and so there's a lot of different kinds of dementia. To be very blunt, many of the treatments are very, very similar.
Okay.
And so it's really hard to say, I have this kind or this kind. To this point, there's still a lot of clinical diagnosis.
Some of them appear to be occur more often in younger people, in their 30s, 40s. Is that right? Or
Very true.
okay, what are those like?
They're very severe. They're very usually sudden onset, and it's very bizarre and unusual behaviors on top of the memory loss.
Okay.
And so a lot of the younger people are found in the prison system and in the legal system because that young person was just doing naughty things.
Okay.
But if you really sit back and examine that person, there's an underlying neurologic problem that's causing it. And those are the earlier dementias, or it could be related to diseases like Parkinson's disease. And sometimes that then goes with a memory loss really early on.
Okay, so that's why it's important that you be evaluated, right?
Huge.
Yeah. So to be evaluated, what's the first step? If you suspect that you have it, or you're concerned about your mom or your dad or whoever, what should you do? Go to your doctor, family doctor
open
first?
your mouth and you question,
Okay.
Is this normal? Because there's so much information out there on Google and YouTube that you could have yourself all worried about something that has nothing to do with dementia. And so the first thing is just being aware and saying, is this normal or not? One of my huge pet peeves is somebody coming in saying, well, I lost my car and then I ended up in Matamidi and I was supposed to be in Madison. that's just old age, though. I'm okay. And it really isn't. There's a lot of things blamed on old age that are not true. And so there's a lot of things that can be done to intervene if there is a problem. But if you look at dementia, as a medical doctor, and it can be your own personal physician that you've worked with for 30, 50, 80 years, that person is trained and able to have this conversation with you. We start looking, are you on new medications? Is there some supplement that your granddaughter told you to give you great hair that's now causing troubles?
Okay.
And it can be very simple like that. Or it could be an infection, it could be a stroke, it could be mood, like depression or anxiety, because if your mind is worried so much about this, you're not paying attention to details. I had an older gentleman diagnosed with adult onset ADHD, and it showed up as a classic memory. And once that underlying problem was fixed, the memory was better. And so there's a lot of things it could be before it gets to be, I've got dementia. But a person has to not be afraid to come forth and say, this is what I'm noticing. What is it?
So you have to rule things out too, is it?
Huge. It's when a person comes to me with that first question of do I have, the first visit is a good physical exam, trying to find out if there's something clinically wrong, some blood tests, some imaging and radiology, and then they come back and we talk about those. And if there is nothing that's fixable, then we talk, okay, now this is where we're headed.
Some people that I've talked to have indicated that when they go to their family doctor, that family doctor says, oh, it's just old age, or everybody has memory loss or whatever. How can you kind of push beyond that, with your doctor?
You pull up your big pants and you say, it's not just old age, I want something better for me. Because the reality is that old age is a slowing process, but it doesn't mean that the learning stops.
Okay.
And so it truly is true, like everything else in medicine, you need to be your own advocate. You need to be your advocate for yourself and your family members. And if that little voice says this isn't right, just be blunt and say, I don't agree with you. Or if you want to be a little bit more subtle, say, you know what? Sometimes another opinion is really good, and then it would be a referral to a geriatrician, a neurologist, a psychiatrist, and those people then can do that evaluation and determine with you if it is something more than just normal aging.
So it's about being either your own advocate or being an advocate for someone you love.
Huge.
Okay.
Huge.
And there are people who specialize, like yourself, geriatric doctors who know maybe more than the average medical guy would, right?
Well, the geriatric training is focused on adult medicine. And so we know what normal is and what normal isn't. And sometimes it's just a matter of that the family doctor's comfort level,
Right.
or time to dig through it. And so if you really want to be nice, you could say, you know what, is there a different doctor who might have a little bit more time and focus to sort this out with me? And so you still keep that relationship with your family doctor,
Sure.
but it's just another opinion from somebody who does this all the time.
Because it sounds like, when you're evaluating for this, it is kind of time intensive.
It's huge. It's huge because the spectrum of problems is huge, and it's subtle things many times. And you just say, well, I got lost on this detour because the construction cones were there. Well, that makes sense. But the reality is as people start this journey of my own memory loss, I know that something's not right, and so I spend a lot of energy covering it. Because I don't want you or you to know it. I don't want my community members knowing that I'm losing it. And so we're hiding it. And so there are subtle things like vague answers of, oh, it was a good time. We had a good time with those people over there. But if I said, well, what was that time and who are those people? Well, the people who've lived there for a long time. And I can never pin it down. And so if you don't have those antennas up, you could miss some early diagnoses really, really easily.
And that's why we should care about whether you have dementia or not.
Huge. Because the earlier you recognize it, it's kind of like anything else. The smaller you find that cancer, the earlier you find your heart disease, you can do something to intervene to make your quality of life better for a longer time period.
How do you talk to your family or your loved one about this? What do you recommend to people?
Like if I'm worried about me? Usually it's the other way around.
Okay.
Because I don't want other people, because like you said earlier, it's such a stigma. It's such a, you got it. And I don't want to be seen as weak,
Right.
especially in our society. Weakness is not good. And so usually it's family members coming to me, oh, how do I tell mom this, or how do I tell my husband this? And so a lot of times, it's just that upfrontness, but the Scandinavians don't confront anybody. And so sometimes it's just, you know what, mom or dad or whoever your loved one is, I'm a little bit worried that things aren't clicking like it used to. Can we just go and check it out and make sure that there's nothing that we can do to help you? And leave it that vague. And a lot of times I get love notes from family members before appointments saying, oh my gosh, look what mom's doing, look what dad is doing. And they list things that aren't right and concerning. And so then as the provider, I already kind of know what's going on.
So that's a really good thing to do.
It's awesome, because then it's the bad doctor who's asking all those nosy questions. Or maybe it's that good doctor who can really help me out, and it's not me saying it that something's wrong with me. And so it's that burden lifted off my shoulders that I'm worried. And then we can have that conversation. And then it's not that family member that I have to live with being the one saying, you tattled on me.
Right.
And so that behind the scenes letter is so helpful many, many, many times.
And then I would imagine even other than family members, there's friends and more extended family that would have information too, right?
Definitely. It gets a little bit hard with that legal, I can't talk about my neighbor to you. But sometimes there have been cases where neighbors have, oh, this is what's happening and this is what we're noticing. And so then it's just a little harder, a little bit more subtle to say, you know, I've been noticing that you've worn that same favorite purple sweater of mine the last 3 times I've seen you. Tell me about that. And so, you know, family members or neighbors are noticing things like that. There are ways that medical provider can bring it into the conversation.
They can funnel it through a family member or something.
Absolutely.
That's involved with it. Are there, you mentioned that there are treatments or things that can be done to mitigate this. What are we talking about?
I wish I could say, here's the fix-it pill, and it takes it away. But there is nothing to cure it, which is a hard thing to say, because it is kind of a terminal disease if you really want to look at it that way. I tell people that there's kind of a 2 approach. Yeah, there's a 2 approach. There are medications available that slow the fast progression. And there's a lot of people out there that don't believe in them. And so when I present it to an individual and a family member, I always want that teamwork there. I say it's like a faith pill. I'm going to take it, and unlike a Tylenol where in an hour I feel great, we have to believe that it's keeping me at home. It's keeping me doing my own clothing and bathing and maybe driving for a lot longer than if I didn't take it. The goal is to keep me in my home so I'm not in that facility. And there's a couple different medications. Do you want names?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. The donepezil is the generic that's been around for a long time, and that's usually the first one to kind of hold on to my ability to remember and slow that loss faster. And then the newer one is memantine, and that one is meant to piggyback with that to help me stay functional. And so one of the classic stories, it was a husband-wife, and the wife was spending hours each morning fighting her husband to get through the bathroom and to get dressed and to do his jobs. And she found a doctor to start that memantine, and she said, I could lay the clothing out on the bed, and an hour and a half later, he'd come out dressed by himself. It took him a long time, but that gave her an hour and a half of caregiver reprieve. And she could have her quiet time. And he still had the feeling that he was doing his own cares, and he had that independence. And so that was a classic success story of that medication. But that's the easy part. And the hard part is up to families and friends and community to support the person. Because those treatments aren't going to fix, but what is going to make the everyday life better is just setting routines and structures and setting your environment up for success rather than failure. And there's so much to learn about that.
So a lot of part of your treatment, or a big part of it, is not just the not medications alone, but learning and working with the caregivers as well to set up an environment that supports the person.
Absolutely.
And are most people pretty open to that?
In theory, yes.
Okay.
It's hard work because part of it, well, a big part of it, and I use that term of a terminal diagnosis because for the caregivers, mainly, you have to wrap your head around the idea that life is going to change. And many people, after they've walked this journey, have actually said the grieving for the loss of that person that I knew started the day you gave me that diagnosis.
Sure.
Because now it's let's use a husband-wife relationship. It's not that sweetheart that I had that first dance with when I was 16. I am now social worker, housekeeper, pill giver, nurse, caregiver, and I become a full-time employee of that person's needs. And so at the end of the day, the last thing you're going to do is sit down and have this conversation about your stress.
Right.
He's going to go to bed and I'm going to crash and then start my laundry and. And so it's, yes, I want to keep my loved ones at home with me, but it turns into such a challenge of how to be a practical caregiver, but you also have to take care of that personal relationship that's so hard.
Yeah. And take care of yourself physically.
Well, yeah,
'cause
that too.
Isn't that one of the things
It's huge.
that we find is that caregivers often go downhill pretty
Yes.
quickly, right?
Yes. And the interesting thing is that even though a person living with dementia can't articulate their thoughts and feelings, their perceived behaviors are reflections off of the stress or the peace in their home or in their environment. And so what happens, the caregiver many times will try really, really, really hard, and early on it works, but then as the dementia gets worse, the individual is awake at night and sleeping in the day. I need you to be awake in the day and sleeping at night. My stress goes up, I get more short-tempered. This person's behaviors get worse, and they just escalate together, and they feed off of each other. And so that's when usually the decision is, I can't do this anymore. You need to go to a facility.
What happens with it? So that's one of the triggers for that. What other kinds of things trigger that they need to go somewhere in a memory? They call them memory care units. Is that what it's called?
Oh, yeah, ideally, yes. If you look at the research studies, the number one thing, the trigger that says I cannot stay at home anymore, is incontinence.
Oh.
Bladder incontinence is the one that says I can't do this, because now it's a 150-pound person, if you will, to roll and put the adult undergarments on, to clean the sheets, to clean the clothes, and it's hard work. It's hard work to lift that person who might get weak and can't just say, oh, I need to go to the bathroom. And so it's a lot of personal cares and the laundry. And that's the number one thing. A lot of times, hopefully it doesn't get that way, but some people can keep individuals at home until they start wandering.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden I had one family where the individual was found sleeping in the neighbor's parked car in the street. And the individual family caregivers didn't know. And so since more programs and more people are talking about this, we've gotten a lot of tools to help the caregivers keep people at home. There are alarms for doors. There are things that they can do to keep them safe. But it becomes that night and day sleep disturbance that really makes it hard.
Yeah. You touched a little bit on how to act around a person with dementia. Both caregivers obviously go through have this incredible stress that they have to deal with, but as the normal public or your friends, like you said, good way to do it would be to say, gee, I've seen you wear that sweater. Is it good to bring it up even once the diagnosis is there?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I think one of the hard parts early on, it's a again, it's seen as a weakness.
Right.
And so I'm going to hide everything I can. And so instead of one thought, it's taking 3 and 4 thoughts before I can say something. And so once it's known to my family members that I have a memory problem, then it's one burden off my shoulders. But then what I a lot of times encourage families to do is to definitely tell your extended family, if it's children or grandchildren, but also let your close friends know. Let the people that you interact with the most know, and it doesn't have to be, oh, you've got dementia, but just bring in a subtle, kind comment. You know what? Mom's having a little bit of memory problem. Today's not a good day. Can we keep this visit short? Or why don't I kind of help Mom out, because sometimes those ideas get a little bit confused, and we can just save her some embarrassment if we just take care of the business.
Right.
And so there's easy ways of doing that. One of the hardest things for individuals to accept is that sometimes we have to use some white lies. And so if I am convinced that this table is green, there is nothing you're going to do to talk me out of it. And so it gets to be kind of this butting of heads if you tell me, no, it's a brown table, because I see green. And so all of a sudden, you're out to get me now. And so you are no longer in my trust circle. I don't trust anything you say because this is not green to you. And so then that leads into troubles with, I'm not getting in the car with you, I'm not taking that food, I'm not taking those medications.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so sometimes you just have to say, you know what, I really like that green shade. That would be really neat over here. What do you think about this over here? Can we take a look at the grass and see, oh, isn't that neat? Did you see that robin? He just found a worm.
So deflect.
And so you acknowledge, but then you certainly get away from that and just change it to a different topic.
And don't sweat the small things when it comes to this.
Exactly.
So, because I heard somebody say that, you know, and my dad used to do this when my mother was going through it, that she would be, you know, she would make a mistake or whatever, and or people would come to see her and they would say, Helen, you remember this person, you remember that, and she couldn't, you know, rather than coming in and saying, look who's here. Adeline is here.
You bet. And there gets to be a type of conversation pattern that you get to just use as everyday life. And I'll encourage this with the CNAs at the nursing homes. Instead of just walking and knock, knock, it's time to go, let's go, it's good morning, Mrs. Smith. This is the coldest November day I've seen in a long time. How do you remember those days around Thanksgiving?
Yeah.
And so it's not like I'm giving you weird stuff, but you already have acknowledged it's morning time, and it's cold, and the month, and the upcoming holiday. And so then that opens a lot of, oh, I remember Thanksgiving into a world that's familiar. Many of the dementias, the old memories are right, crisp, and clear.
Right.
What happened yesterday, I don't have a clue. And so if I know that I can talk about something I know, then I can feel like I'm part of the conversation. I'm part of my world. But if you're asking me, well, what did you think of that TV show last night and that news story this morning? What do you think of that president? I don't have a clue, so I'm not going to be participating. I'm going to feel isolated and set back, and that's not comfortable
and maybe even
for me.
intimidated by it, right?
Hugely.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, this is a concern for people my age, particularly the baby boomer generation, whatever. And one of the things we've decided to do is to try and start talking with our kids about these kinds of issues, not just dementia necessarily, but all of the issues that are associated with aging. But is that something you would recommend too, that families start talking about these things?
If I have the luxury of walking this road right from the beginning with my patients and families, it's a teamwork. The first visit is, let's make sure it's not a medical problem that can be fixed. The second visit is, oh, we've got a new diagnosis to work with. And it's just like a cancer diagnosis. The brain shuts down, and now what do I do? And so at that time, I've gathered a lot of information from the ADRC, from the Alzheimer's Association, from some research studies on what exactly it is, where on earth can I go for help, because it's going to be coming tomorrow, next week, next month. And part of that collection of information on my almost checklist of we should be talking about this sooner than later, maybe not today, but maybe that next visit, is what do I want out of life? What do I want to really do? Who do I want to see? What's on my bucket list? Because now when my memory is as good as it's going to be, let's do it. This is also an awesome opportunity to leave legacies for my family. And so I'll stereotype the ladies. If I've always had these recipes that are grandma's recipes, let's put them down. And now with technology, it can be through voice and sight rather than just handwriting. It could be, let's make a quilt together. Let's make a wooden treasure box with Grandpa. Let's build these memories while we still can. But then there's also the legal piece. What's important to my health care going forward? Because now I know that it's likely not going to be a heart attack or a stroke that's going to take my life, but I might be that person in the nursing home for the next 8 years, not talking, not doing anything for myself. And now we have the blessing, I think, of being able to say, this is important to me. If I can't feed myself, if I can't talk, maybe I don't ever want an antibiotic for an infection. Maybe at that point I don't ever want to see a hospital. That's when we bring in the palliative care and ultimately the hospice teams to just give me the best feeling in that moment. And it's time to relook at those advanced directives, making sure that they represent really what's important.
And people are receptive to this, do you think? Or are we getting better about this?
We're getting a lot better. There's still a lot of people that say, oh, my family will know what's important to me. And I'm like, I don't think so. Let's ask them. And many of them don't. And it's that look of, how did you not know that? And so it's a great chance to open that conversation. And there's a lot of tools out there to help work through that, because what's great for me today, next year might be exactly not what I want.
Sure. I know you're involved in the Dementia Friendly, the coalition, and that represents a wide variety of people in the community. How does that fit into what you're seeing for your patients in terms of benefits?
It's huge. It's fantastic because, again, it's not being afraid to go into the store and stand in front of the counter and say, can I have some orange juice, please? And that person is selling meat. And so if a person is recognizing that maybe I'm not all there, or I'm struggling a little bit, instead of going, oh my gosh, did you see that person over there, and just putting me off, I can say, maybe I need to find somebody who can guide me to the orange juice. And so it's not a scary world. I don't have to be so isolated.
Sure.
It's nice to know too for the caregivers that they aren't alone, because it truly needs to be a team approach. It's hard work, either being the person walking this road, and it's hard work for the family members and caregivers. And so awareness and being able to say to the guy where I always get my coffee in the morning, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe what Mom did last night. And he said, yeah, I understand. You were up late last night. It was a bad night. Let me give you a large instead of a medium coffee. Let me give you real coffee instead of decaf. And just knowing that you're not walking it alone, because there are so many people who've been doing it alone. There's resources out there now where you can come together and not feel badly about saying, oh my gosh, I had this bad thought. I can't believe I said, I'm going to put you in a nursing home. I didn't mean it, but I was tired. And other people are going to understand that and help through those times.
So you really can build a network of support in a community that would make a big difference, not just to the person with dementia, but the family and the caregivers.
Absolutely.
As we draw to a close, is there anything I haven't asked you about that you want to mention or that you think people should know?
Off the top of my head, no. But if you ask the question, I'll give you a whole bunch more.
But what's your biggest concern going forward, and what are you most optimistic about?
Wasn't ready for that. My biggest concern, I think, is that the way our society is set, we aren't yet able to support those caregivers and what they need. There's still a lot of, I need to be at work at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I don't have the finances to be able to use an assisted living memory unit. What am I going to do? Mom doesn't need a nursing home, but we don't have the money to buy an assisted living. And so I think that through awareness, and this is my hope, and this is going to work. The more we talk about it, the more we learn about it, and aren't afraid to say this is a medical condition that we can help and manage. I'm hoping that the politics and the insurance will come and support these families to get the help that they need, so that it's not an all or nothing. And so my concern is that people aren't getting the care that they maybe could to make the quality of life good, either because we're afraid to say something or because we can't afford it. And then the hope and the anticipation is that it becomes an everyday thing, like, oh, you've got high blood pressure. Well, that's great. How are you fixing it? Oh, you've got some memory problems. Good. How can I help you do this? So that's what my hope is.
That would be good.
Yeah.
That would be very good.
There's a lot of hope.
Well, thank you, Dr. Severson. I appreciate you coming here today. There are resources across St. Croix County that are available to families and individuals who are dealing with dementia. We've provided that information here as part of this program. And I mentioned the Dementia Friendly Coalition that's sponsored by the St. Croix Valley Foundation. They're also at work across communities across the county, and their information is here as well. This interview has been part of a series that, along with Dr. Severson, has included interviews with caregivers, elder law specialist Jennifer O'Neill, and St. Croix County Dementia Care Specialist Nancy Abrahamson. I want to thank them all again for their participation and for sharing their experiences and expertise that hopefully will help us all better understand what it's like living with dementia. Thank you for watching.